Hey folks, thanks for listening to the Baptist Review podcast. My name is David Sons, and I am honored to be the host of this podcast. You are listening to the pilot episode of the Baptist Review podcast. And in this episode, you'll hear from several of the leadership team, myself, Griffin Gulledge, Rob Collingsworth, and Jared Cornutt, talk a little bit about how the Baptist Review started and what our hopes are for the future. Thanks for listening to this first episode, and we're going to hear a word from our sponsor and jump right in. I want to take a moment to mention one of our sponsors, Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina. Southeastern believes that the Great Commission is the church's mission. That's why they are committed to ministry preparation and partnership with the local church. Through more than 40 advanced, graduate, undergraduate degrees, Southeastern offers robust biblical theological education that equips students to serve the church and fulfill the Great Commission. For more information about Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, visit sebts.edu. Hey listeners, today I want to talk to you about something truly special from one of our sponsors, Lifeline Children's Services. Lifeline believes that adoption is a divine calling. It's a way that God provides families for vulnerable children who deserve love and a sense of belonging. You see, Lifeline understands the bigger picture of adoption, that it's a crucial part of God's redemptive purpose. Lifeline's Children's Services Adoptions Program, answering the call to share love, build families, because every child deserves a home. Visit lifelinechild.org/adoption today to learn more and begin your adoption journey. Hello, welcome to the Baptist Review podcast. My name is David Sons. I have the privilege of hosting this podcast, and I am here today with several of my friends from the Baptist Review, Rob Collingsworth, Griffin Gulledge, Jared Cornutt. Give these guys just an opportunity to introduce themselves in just a moment. But if you're listening to the Baptist Review podcast, you probably want to know what exactly is the Baptist Review. And so we're going to talk about in this episode a little bit about how the Baptist Review kind of started and what our kind of hopes and dreams and goals are for it in the coming year, and then talk a little bit about what we hope to accomplish and how we hope that this will lead to a better conversation towards a better convention. But I'll go ahead and give these guys an opportunity to introduce themselves. And so, Griffin, I'll start with you. Why don't you introduce yourself, where you serve, and how you got involved?
Yeah, I'm the pastor of Madison Baptist Church in Madison, Georgia. Been involved in the SBC on and off for about 10 years. Was director of communications at Southeastern Seminary and currently serving on the executive committee in Georgia, and we'll talk more in a little bit about kind of how this came to be, but really love our convention, believe in our cooperation, love the local church. Of all the things I'm doing, local church is the best thing, and so...
Yeah, all four of us have kind of had relationships before this, right? Have been friends for a while and kind of came together to put this together. So, Jared, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, Jared Cornutt. I am the lead pastor at North Shelby Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. Previously was a pastor in Texas. I've been involved in SBC life for quite some time. I did my MDiv at Southeastern Seminary and painfully working my way through my dissertation at Midwestern for my PhD, and excited about what we got going on here.
What are you doing your doctoral studies in?
I am writing on Andrew Fuller and his preaching on the topic of justification and how the implications on that for the modern missions movement.
Oh, right on. Thanks, Jared. Rob, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, Rob Collingsworth. I work at Griffin Gulledge as the Director of Strategic Relationships. I've done that for the better part of a decade. I'm feeling like an old man. It's a great place. I love it. I've had some involvement with the SBC at the national level a little bit. You and I were on resolutions committee this past year. A couple of state things I'm involved in. I'm currently, I think, about to wrap up my final term as, this is an alphabet soup here, a member of the TERLC. That's the SBTC.
Okay.
They have a Texas Ethics and Religious Liberty Committee, and we do some working with the state on legislative stuff. It's not lobbying per se, but some involvement with the SBTC. And yeah, I love the convention. I am convinced of our ability to take the gospel to the nations, and I think the best way we can do that is by talking to one another and trying to build bridges. And I think what we want to do here involves some of that. So.
Yeah, I think so for sure. And I think that kind of what you just said a minute ago, I think all four of us have grown up or at least have extensive experience in the Southern Baptist Convention, love the convention, believe in the mission and vision of the Southern Baptist Convention and the cooperative efforts that we're trying to do to get the gospel to our neighbors and the nations. And so I think that our hope is that this would be a part of this, but maybe let's kind of talk about how it kind of initiated, how things kind of started. And Griffin, you kind of helped pull all of us together around the table. So why don't you talk a little bit about how kind of the Baptist Review kind of came to be? I know this is a different iteration of something that people may be familiar with from the past, but tell us a little bit about how it all kind of came to be.
Yeah, and I want to say on the SBTCERLC, the only thing that Southern Baptists like more than panel discussions and podcasts is acronyms. Yeah,
Acronyms. We love a good acronym.
We have the most insidery of insider language. If you come from the outside, you're like, what language are these people speaking? So the way that the Baptist Review in this iteration, what we're doing here and now came together really is just the fruit of where the convention is. The Southern Baptist Convention, I think we can all agree, is at a crossroads. We're not, our conversation among ourselves is not going well. There's theological infighting, there's public scandals, there's leadership failures, there's lots of politics inside the convention and then outside politics affecting the convention. And all those things together are really fraying the threads of our cooperation. And I'll be the first to admit, I haven't always handled this perfectly myself. I haven't always responded to some of those things in ways that, looking back on it, I would have responded the same way. I think we can all look at the way things are going in the convention and say, we need a better conversation. And so that's really been on my heart. I think, like many Southern Baptist pastors, I'm in a group text where we're lamenting these sorts of things. I'm in like 6 group texts where we're lamenting these sorts of things. And this cultural problem has gotten us to a place where we're talking about one another, but we're not really talking well to one another. And in the milieu of that, lots of our platforms where these things once happened have disappeared. And as they've disappeared, things have not risen to take their place, except for one thing, which is Twitter, which I'm still going to call Twitter. I'm never going to call it X.
You mean X?
Ever, never, never.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Twitter. I will be 65 years old calling it Twitter. By the way, I hope it doesn't exist when I'm 65 years old. But Twitter is not the solution. Twitter has led to a sort of viral seeking, tribalism, group thing, but also a place where, because of some of those forces, people feel like, I can't even contribute. I can't even chime in because people are just going to dogpile on me. Lots of the old blogs that used to be very prominent, either those people are not blogging at all anymore, or the blogs are not really active. And then you think about the annual meeting itself. We get to the annual meeting, and what have we done? We've gotten rid of all the nighttime sessions. We've reduced the number of days. Now, I know Bart is bringing back a nighttime session this year, so I'm optimistic about that. But we get to these meetings with so many big issues, so many controversies, and all this fighting swirling around on Twitter. And you just think, we haven't even had the conversation. We didn't even have the debate. We had maybe the fight, but we didn't even, we don't feel fully informed. We don't feel like we've been able to talk. And for me, the sense of it just doesn't have to be this way. And so creating the Baptist Review as a forum for Southern Baptists to engage in good faith discussion about the issues and current events and questions that matter in our convention, that happened in order to address that. And we also need it to be a place where, frankly, Southern Baptists deserve more than discernment blogs and Twitter trolls, but they also deserve more than puff pieces and press releases. And we need a place where we can ask the real questions and get real answers. But the questions can be asked fairly and kindly and answered truthfully, where we can get people of different opinions together to talk with one another and not just about one another. My hope for this is that the Baptist Review really will be a place where people feel like this is a home, this is a safe place to be part of the conversation, where everyone agrees on two things. We all agree wholeheartedly with the teaching and doctrine of the Baptist Faith and Message 2000, without reservation. And we all agree on cooperation. And so if we believe the same things and we agree on cooperation, then we can disagree on on all of the other stuff. So I reached out to you guys. Jared and I were the first to have this conversation. Early on, brought in Rob into that conversation, began asking who are some, just friends of ours, people we love, people we know, who we want to help guide some of this. David, of course, your name came up very early. We all love you, and so invited you to be part of this. And then there's somebody not sitting around the table with us, Andrew Hebert, who's also on our leadership team. Andrew, has such a valuable voice in our convention and has been guiding this from early on. So Andrew's with us. And then as part of our journal initiative, we'll talk about later, Ryan Putman. And so I finally, I think the Baptist Review also has this sort of three-prong effort to do what I just described. First is an editorial website. This is not just a blog. We're not going to be live blogging. We're not throwing haymakers. We're not letting people come and vent out their feelings about the SBC. This is more of like the op-ed page of the Southern Baptist Convention, allowing people who are informed, people who contribute in a helpful way, grounded in cooperation, but who are serious about what we believe and if we're effective and if we're faithful, to come and write. And so we've got a lot of content already from some of the leading voices in the SBC. I'm super proud of some of the things that are going to be rolling out over the next 6 months, especially. Then, of course, second is a podcast like the one we're doing here. Starting this effort, of course, we all know, now we'll share with you who are listening, starting our podcast with 5 in-depth conversations with Bart Barber, where he is going to lay out some of the most major questions and answers at our convention. We get to have kind of hard conversation with Bart about some of those things. So there's an editorial website. There is a podcast. And then finally, producing a sort of what I would call a semi-academic journal, not unlike maybe like the 9 Marks Pastor's Journal, where we, working with leading academics and leading voices, address some of those major issues in a more thoroughgoing, documented, researched way, releasing in hopefully May every year, so that as we head into the convention, people feel like they've had an opportunity to wrestle with the issues, not just through a 1,200-word blog post, but through a 12 to 15-page article that really informs them on the intricacies of the various historical, theological, practical, missional questions that we're asking. So right now, those are the big prongs. We're not a faction. We're not a political group. We're not trying to get people elected. We're trying to be a home for that kind of conversation. I know it's kind of long, but that's what we're about.
No, I think that's a great, helpful overview of exactly kind of who we're hoping to be and what we're hoping to do, and the space that we're hoping to fill within the convention. I think what you just said is important, and I think all of us believe that, and all of us believe that there can be a space where we have reasonable dialogue about things that we agree about and things that we disagree about. And you mentioned that kind of three-pronged attack, the editorial, the podcast, and then the journal itself. And Rob, I know that you're going to be involved at least in pretty significantly in the editorial piece. And so kind of talk that out, flesh that out a little bit for us, kind of what you're hopeful for as far as when we begin to publish articles and from contributors, kind of what you're looking for and how you hope that furthers the conversation within the convention.
Yeah, thanks, David. When I first got a call from Jared, my initial response was, I don't think you want me involved, because I would want something like this to host if there's both sides, if there's different ideas or tribes or whatever. I was like, I just don't know that that's what you want, and that's what I would want, and I'm not sure you would want me to be a part of it. And y'all talking got back to me, said, no, we do want that. And so I jumped on, and one thing that Griffin, you mentioned this a minute ago, but I come into this with some, conviction over how I have not done well in talking about issues related to the convention in the past. Not engaged in good faith all the time, engaged in bad faith some of the time. It's an issue of repentance with me and the Lord and some other people, and I've had to make some apologies and repent to individuals about some of that stuff. And I came into this thinking, if we're going to do an echo chamber, I don't know that moves the ball down the field. I don't think if we're going to preach to the choir, and like the 4 of us sitting here, Andrew, Ryan, I think we agree on a lot of stuff. We don't agree. We've talked just in the last hour or two about some things we disagree on.
Yeah, just shoot me a text if you want to know what Rob is wrong about.
Yeah.
I'll let you know.
But I think it's really, really valuable that we represent the varying opinions within the convention, but that we do so from a standpoint of people who are trying to act in good faith. And so I think we want to elevate reasonable center voices in the convention and give voice to both sides of various conversations or difficulties or things we're contending about one way or the other. We want to say, hey, for any given issue, the most contentious thing right now is the law amendment. I think that's the thing that's the most divisive thing. We want to host people who are going to have their reasons of why they're going to vote not vote for the law amendment, and we want to host the best version of someone arguing why they do want to vote for the law amendment.
Rob, can you talk about what the center? You said center. I think some people hear that and their flag goes up and they say, "Oh, third wayism." It is a third wayism where we're always going to be splitting the difference. We're never going to take a stand. What is the center that we're aiming for?
I think my definition of the center, and you guys feel free to disagree. I think there's a fringe on both sides of people that are on opposite sides of things that think opposite about stuff, and the way they engage is maybe equally not great.
But also the same, right? It's like the horseshoe theory.
Horseshoe theory.
It all comes together in anger and
more
rage.
alike than they're different.
Yeah, but maybe on theological things they're on opposite sides, but they're not engaging in good faith. They're not displaying the fruit of the Spirit.
Or engaging in a way that would be helpful to the conversation.
Yeah, it's not moving the ball down the field. It's not helpful. So I think that's what we want to avoid. And then what we want to look for is like, hey, not alignment, not the center of where everyone agrees, or there's this whole thing about Big Eva and the platform, and that's a conversation we can have on to what degree is there some element that we see a lot of the same faces over and over again. That's a conversation to have, but we can do that and we can talk about that issue in a way that it's not just accusations. And I think that's the kind of thing, like if there's a spectrum within that doesn't include that fringe, but it's people who disagree, but they disagree like brothers and sisters, I think that's the center. I think we want to say, hey, these are people who they're not disagreeing on Scripture and on the Baptist faith and message. We're just trying to figure out how does that apply. And I think people who want to engage like brothers and sisters, the way that Scripture would have us treat one another as people who are going to be worshiping together in heaven one day, right? We're going to be all before the throne in heaven together. We're a family. If we can talk like a family, and family doesn't mean you don't ever raise your voice. It doesn't mean you don't ever contend passionately. It just means we do that like Christians.
In my family, it means you only raise your voice.
No comment about my family.
Hey, I want to pause for just a minute to point people to Reconstructing Faith. This is a great podcast from Trevin Wax and the North American Mission Board. This podcast has gotten really great reviews from pastors and church leaders who want to look deeper at some of the major issues facing the church together. It's documentary style. Trevin is taking different issues and bringing in some wisdom and perspective from church history and from the church around the world. It's one of my favorite podcasts, and I hope that you'll check out Reconstructing Faith from the North American Mission Board with Trevin Wax. Jared, you're local church pastor working on doctoral work. You're a dad, you're a husband, busy guy. There's a lot kind of happening in your life. Why the kind of incentive for you? What motivates you to go, hey, this is an important place for me to spend my time. This is an important place for me to invest. This is an important place for me to put some energy and effort into.
That's a great question. When I went to seminary in 2013, I didn't know a lot about the national convention. I just knew about Alabama Baptist. And in 2014, I took the SBC annual meeting class with Dr. Nathan Finn. And so you have class and you go to the annual meeting. That's my first annual meeting in Baltimore. There might have been 5,000 people at that annual meeting. And I remember Dr. Finn saying, you'll never be more embarrassed and proud at the same time to be a Southern Baptist. And I kind of felt that way at it. But it seems like in the 10 years since then, I feel almost more of the embarrassment than the proudness. And so I believe in the cooperative program. I believe in our mission. I believe in what we want to accomplish. But I believe we have lost the vision on that because we've dug in trenches and we've made enemies of people that we're going to spend eternity with. And so I would just love to see us come together and be able to focus on the mission, even if we don't agree on every issue, and not have to say that I'm not for you, you shouldn't even be a part of us. And so if I'm going to spend any of my time outside of what I'm normally doing, I feel like something like this, the Great Commission, the mission of Southern Baptist, is something worth giving my time to. And if God would let me use my voice and use my opinions and use any leadership that I may have towards that end, I think that is time well spent, because I could spend it in a lot of other places. But I really do believe in our mission, and I hope that God will continue the mission of the cooperative program for another 100 years. And so it's going to take all of us working together, and I think coming to a place where we can have honest, good faith conversations for, one, the glory of God, and then two, for the advancement of His kingdom, is where we've got to get back to, and we're not there right now.
One of the gaps that we're trying to fill is also have meaningful cooperations. Like, does anybody want to read an editorial page or listen to a podcast where we just say, cooperate in everything? I mean, we all believe in cooperation, but we want to put the cooperative spirit into practice here, because I think what has happened is that we've got real issues in the SBC. We've got issues about how we're represented and how we represent ourselves. We've got issues about, or questions about some of our strategy. There's been real legitimate conversation about church planting, state conventions, associations, the role of some of our entities, some of the responsibilities our entities carry, about the effectiveness of, various voices and leaders along the way. And those are meaningful conversations. And it has felt like we can't have those conversations because instead of having a meaningful conversation about what we believe or what's best, the conversation just keeps coming back to, whose side are you on?
It's either the sky is falling or everything is great, and you have to choose one of those.
And so, and we've crowded out the meaningful talk. And so this is not just going to be hitting the cymbal again and again of, why can't you guys all just get along and why can't you just cooperate? We're assuming that as we go. Now we're gonna press for cooperation at times, but that is the foundation, and we want to build on that foundation a meaningful cooperation about what it looks like for our convention to be better and healthier. Those conversations have got to happen. Man, just to be in more frank terms, every issue cannot be about what you think about Russell Moore, right? And now Russ is gone, and so I think that side of things have receded, but other tribalistic things fill that gap, and it sucks the air out of our ability to meaningfully engage as people who have differences of opinion on church planning strategy or international missions emphases, or the way we do cooperative giving versus societal giving, or the way that we structure ourselves through state convention, association, national convention, the way that we deal with abuse without establishing ascending liability or connections. I mean, we've got way too many important conversations about the present health, the future health of our convention, and even just the future iteration. What shape is this going to take in a complex 2025 to 2045 era, that if we spend the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years just asking whose side are you on, eventually none of us are going to be on any side. We're going to be on the side of, well, I wish we hadn't fallen apart. Maybe we could have done things differently. So let's do it differently now.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that we're going to have to contend with is that it certainly is displaying itself in the SBC, but we are not unique in this regard. We are facing culturally, certainly in America, but I think in the world, a widespread institutional distrust crisis. There's a crisis of distrust in institutions. And I don't think that the answer to people distrusting institutions is just to keep clapping them on the back and say, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. Even if you think everything's fine, the way to increase trust is to listen to people, to hear what they're saying, and to whatever degree that there's any validity to some critique they have or a question they have, you go, let me see if I can answer that, or maybe that's something we agree on. Like I have been critical of a particular faction in the SBC, and I think I've not come around to be in entire agreement with this particular group. But what I recognize is that I think the vast majority of the people who've kind of aligned themselves with this group in one way or another are good SBC pastors who are pastoring. They're Christians, they're brothers, sisters. They're pastoring their church, they're going to their church, and they just are hearing some things that to them are genuinely concerning. And
they don't hate our convention.
They don't hate our convention. They don't hate us.
No,
but
the fact that they've got what they're doing is they love the convention and they want to see it to be better.
Yeah, and what they're looking for is someone else out there to go, you know what? That thing actually happened. That thing you heard about actually happened. It shouldn't have happened. And let's address it. Instead of going, no, it's all fine. Everything's good. It's okay to be able to recognize places where we failed and say, that's a failure. That shouldn't have happened. We can do better.
Rob, haven't we learned, like in the last 5 years, last 10 years, if we've learned anything, haven't we learned that everything is fine is just not true? It's not true. It wasn't true with I&B sexual abuse. It wasn't true with some of our other entity heads handling the sexual abuse. It wasn't true with financial management at all of our entities. It hasn't been true in the way that some of our leaders have treated some of our maybe rank and file people. It hasn't been true in, cooperative giving where, CP is up, CP giving is up. Yeah, I mean, it's up at the national level, but it's down overall. I mean, I can list off so many different areas where we could say everything is not fine, but it's not worth giving. It's not something we should give up on.
And I think the general posture, there are two ways you can do. There are two directions you can go when everything's not fine. You can either become so angry at it all, and frankly, some of the anger I get because these people have not had anyone else look at them and say, you know what, everything's not fine. That's the kind of thing that can make someone angry, and I get that. And I think there's some validity to the way some people feel, because what they're saying is like, hey, X and Y and Z are issues, but no one will say it. No one who has any kind of a platform at all will say that not everything is perfect. And that can make someone get bitter. Or you can go to the opposite extreme, and it's not the opposite extreme. When everything's not perfect, you can either get angry and bitter, or you can say, hey, yes, not everything's fine, but we can fix this stuff. We can work together. And I think the posture that we want to aim toward is, no, not everything is perfect, but can we still act Christ-like toward one another while we try to figure out how to fix the things that are broken and move forward together for the sake of the gospel.
And
even if we don't get our way.
Yeah.
Yes. And do we really believe in what we say about congregationalism in our democratic processes? Because I'll just put my cards on the table. I believe in Southern Baptists. I don't believe in them to be perfect. I don't believe in them to always get everything right. But I believe in that there's a beauty to what we're doing here that reflects something good and true and biblical. And I wouldn't do this if I thought, well, here's another failed attempt where, in 6 months we'll be at each other's throats. I think that when you let Southern Baptists who believe in the inerrant word of God under the authoritative lordship of Christ with the mission of God fully in mind, right in front of their face, and you say, those are your priorities, those are your convictions, now talk to each other. I think that a conversation actually does lead to a healthier convention. I think that truly, we can get better. We can reform. We can treat each other with more dignity. We can do better than we have been doing. If I didn't believe that, this would be a waste of time. So even when I say well, everything is not fine, I'm not saying, apocalypse now.
The sky's falling.
Yeah. What I'm saying is everything is not fine. So we sure better talk to each other, because our hope is the gospel of Jesus, the inerrant word, our shared common mission and cooperation, and that we are going to do it together. We're going to talk to one another. We really can do this. And that's the heart, I think, behind this initiative.
I think not only, and I'll say this as we kind of wrap up here, not only can we do it, I think we are doing it in private. And I think my hope for this platform is I have been more encouraged, okay, kind of looking publicly at the entire convention. There's a lot to be discouraged about. It seems like there's something new every week that you could find to be discouraged about in the public kind of face of the SBC. But where I'm most encouraged is in sitting around a table with pastors and brothers and sisters in Christ who genuinely do care about our convention, care about the lost, care about the Great Commission, are trying to live out Christ-likeness in their daily life. And even though we may not agree on all things, most of the time when I kind of sit across the table from somebody and we have genuine conversation, I come away from those conversations edified, encouraged, perhaps even challenged in the way that I've kind of thought through things. And so my hope is that this can be a little bit of kind of a peek into some of those conversations that are already ongoing, I think, and allowing this platform really to kind of help edify and to further the conversation, because I do think, as you said it, as we really sit down and begin to not just talk past each other or talk over each other, but talk to one another with a trust and a commitment that we are trying the best we can to figure out how to get the gospel to our neighbors in the nations. I think that helps us. I think that's what we're all kind of hoping for and driving for, at least the voices that we're hoping to kind of hear from and platform through this. And
how many annual meetings have we gone into where in the weeks leading up to the convention, you just hear, it's going to be awful, it's going to be terrible, we're going to kill each other, this is just going to be brutal. Blow up. Yeah. It's all going to blow up. And what happens? We get in the room under the authority of the word, under the lordship of Christ, with a common love for one another and commitment to cooperation. And what happens? We're off Twitter. We're talking to each other. We're doing a good job to be informed. And it turns out that when we do that, a lot of those conventions are extremely peaceful, and probably the biggest debate we have is if grilling out is barbecue.
It's not. No, I'm a firm believer that if you give Christian people enough time and space to make the right decision, generally they will do it. We should just do it more than 2 days a year, and we should do it more than just together. We should do it the way that we're online.
Should be the ongoing posture.
Should be the way that we are always online, in person, wherever.
Yeah, I've got a question before we wrap up that I just want to ask you guys. Someone listening to this, probably more than one, they're listening to me talk about this. They're listening to Griffin. They're listening to you guys, and they're going, y'all are the biggest hypocrites in the world because y'all have failed at this. I've seen you on Twitter, Rob Collingsworth, and I'm talking about me.
Yeah. No, you're good.
I'm talking a little bit about Griffin.
That's fine.
No,
I owned it earlier.
How can someone expect to trust the Baptist Review if the guys behind it, they're like, yeah, the thing you're purporting to do, you have not done. So you don't have any credibility.
Who has any credibility? We're all that way. We're all hypocrites. We've all done things the wrong way. We should work to be better and hold one another accountable to be better. But if we're holding to that standard, who could have that conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I can just own some of that. Like I've had a long Twitter thread a couple of times where I said, man, I wish I had engaged differently. I wish I had handled some of this differently. Even like you think about the big Calvinism debates of yesteryear. Doesn't everybody just long for those again? But I can remember somebody I thought was really like one of the bad guys in the conversation was a guy named Brad Witt. Brad and I have struck up a pretty cordial friendship in Georgia where we're together. I reached out to Brad and we've asked him to write for this, and he's going to be contributing early on here at the Baptist Review. And so I guess on the one side, I'm almost saying you're just going to have to take our word for it. But at the same time, I want to say we're not going to do this perfectly, but this is not the platform of Rob Collingsworth and Griffin Gulledge and Jared Cornutt and David Sons and Andrew Abear and a journal led by Ryan Putman. This is a forum for Southern Baptists to be heard. You don't have to agree with me to be part of this. If you want to know what my opinion is, you can follow me on Twitter. You can read some of the things that I write. But I am committed to not just helping the leadership of this effort, but I'm committed to the sort of spirit behind it. And frankly, I've seen the bankruptcy of the sort of rancor and tribalism, not only from the outside, I've seen it from the inside. and I want something different. And I think what Jared just said, like who can do it? You know, if you've got to be perfect, who can do it? The reality is, I think there's a lot of people listening to this. There are people listening to this who are going to say, like, don't listen to anything those guys say. And you know what? If that's you, okay. But I would just encourage you, like, look and see if you feel that way in a year.
And it's not just our voices. It's going to be so many
way
voices.
more voices than I mean. We're not intending to dominate this forum. But the other piece I would say is my intention, my hope here is to not just like lead an effort, but to embody the spirit of this. And so already we've been really intentionally reaching out to people who are different than us, unlike us. Because you said earlier, you want to hear from both sides. There's not two sides in the SBC.
Not just two sides.
There's 100. There's groups in the SBC you don't even know exist. And we want to hear from the kaleidoscopic, fractal parts of the SBC. And so have I done it perfectly? No. Am I willing to admit it? Sure I am. And I would say give us time, wait and see. But I will say I think everyone around this table too has contributed really good things. And that's why we're around this table. I think these guys haven't always done it perfectly. But I think all of us actually are working towards some really good, important things in the SBC. And I think that together we can hold each other to continuing to contribute good things, but also doing it in a healthy way.
Yeah. Well, guys, I appreciate your time, and certainly hopeful that this will be a platform and a resource that pastors and churches and Southern Baptists really all over will find helpful and edifying and encouraging as we continue to try to navigate what it looks like to be a convention that cooperates together for the cause of the Great Commission. So appreciate you guys, appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Baptist Review Podcast.